I am Elon Musk, lying on the rust-red sands of Mars. I gaze at the vast emptiness, stretching beyond the horizon. The stars shimmer in the distance, cold and indifferent, as if watching humanity's every move with silent curiosity. This is the frontier, the edge of what we've conquered. But even here, even now, I can't shake a thought, one that has been circling my mind for days. Plato once said, "Strength alone is not enough. Wisdom is essential." It's a simple truth, yet one that civilizations throughout history have struggled to grasp. Strength builds empires, but wisdom sustains them. Without wisdom, power is like a rocket without navigation, fast, destructive, and ultimately doomed. I sit up, running my fingers through the Martian dust. If Plato was right, then history must have proven his words, over and over again. But where and when? The Vikings come to mind, warriors of legend, feared across continents. They conquered with brute force, their axes carving their names into history. But did they ever stop to think? Did they realize that true power wasn't just in the strength of their arms, but in the power of their minds? A spark ignites in my thoughts. There's only one way to find out. I need to go back to the Viking Age. I need to see for myself. If warriors who ruled by strength alone could be convinced that the greatest weapon of all is the mind, and what better way to do it than with a time machine? The idea takes hold, growing rapidly, like a SpaceX rocket during liftoff. A time machine, of course, I can build one. The technology is almost there, and if it isn't, well, I'll figure it out. After all, every problem is just an engineering puzzle, waiting to be solved. I stand up, the Martian dust settling around me. The Viking Age awaits. It's time to test Plato's words, in the harshest era of them all. Because if I can convince the Vikings that wisdom is greater than strength, then maybe, just maybe, I can change the course of history itself. The moment I stepped out of the time machine, I knew I was in trouble. The air was thick with the scent of firewood and roasted meat. Viking longhouses, built from heavy timber, stood proudly in the distance, their thatched roofs barely holding back the winter cold. Warriors with braided beards and battle-worn armor moved about the village, sharpening axes, feasting, and drinking from massive horns. The atmosphere was raw, primal, a world where the strong ruled and the weak were forgotten. And then there was me, Elon Musk, standing in the middle of it all, in my modern jumpsuit, looking as out of place as a Tesla at a medieval horse market. I had expected curiosity, maybe even cautious respect. What I got instead was laughter. A hand clamped down on my shoulder, strong enough to feel like a steel vise. "Who is this?" A deep voice rumbled. I turned to face the source of the voice. A towering figure, with a braided beard and piercing blue eyes. Ragnar, the leader of the tribe. His presence alone could command armies, and judging by the way the others stepped aside for him, he was not a man to be questioned. I took a breath and went straight to the point. "Ragnar, I've come from a faraway land to teach you something more powerful than any axe or sword." Silence fell over the Vikings. For a second, I thought I had them intrigued. Then Ragnar burst into laughter, and soon the entire village joined in. "You teach us about power?" Ragnar said, wiping his eyes. "You wear no armor, carry no weapon, and you think you can show me what true strength is?" I kept my cool. Strength alone is not enough. Wisdom is essential. The mind is the most powerful weapon of all. Ragnar's laughter stopped. His eyes darkened. "You insult us." The mood shifted. Suddenly, I was surrounded. Warriors cracked their knuckles, some gripping their axes tightly. I could almost hear the unspoken thought in the air. What do we do with a man who disrespects our way of life? Then, a Viking stepped forward, grinning. Let him prove it. Let's see how his wisdom saves him in the trials. The crowd roared in agreement. I sighed. This was going to be bad. A massive Viking warrior handed me an axe. Strike the tree, he said. One clean cut. Easy enough. I gripped the axe, took a deep breath, and swung with all my might. The axe barely chipped the bark. The Vikings exploded into laughter. They marched me to a river, its surface coated with ice. Swim, Ragnar commanded. I stared at the freezing water. This seems highly unnecessary. A Viking shoved me in. The cold was like 1,000 knives, stabbing into my body. I thrashed, gasping, my limbs turning numb almost instantly. It took everything I had to crawl back onto the shore, shivering uncontrollably. More laughter. They handed me a wooden sword and placed me against a Viking warrior twice my size. Last longer than 10 seconds, and you win, Ragnar smirked. The fight lasted 3 seconds. By the time I hit the ground, my ribs ached, my pride was in pieces, and the Vikings were practically rolling on the floor with laughter. You may be smart, Musk, Ragnar chuckled, towering over me, but in the real world, strength is the ruler. I wiped the dirt off my face and smiled. I don't need power. I have something better. Strategy. The laughter stopped. Ragnar's eyes narrowed. You still think you're stronger than us? Not stronger, I corrected. Smarter. That was the wrong thing to say. Angry voices erupted around me. Let's cut off his tongue, someone shouted. Burn him at the stake, another offered. No, throw him into the frozen sea. Ragnar raised a hand, silencing the crowd. Then, with an amused smirk, he nodded. The frozen sea, it is. I was immediately grabbed, bound, and tossed onto a Viking ship. As we sailed into the freezing unknown, I started wondering if maybe, just maybe, I should have come with a better plan. But then, just as we reached the heart of the icy abyss, a second Viking ship approached, carrying men from Ragnar's own tribe. They shouted, their voices urgent. The message was clear. The Wolf clan is preparing for war, a rival Viking group planning to attack Ragnar's village in a week. Ragnar's face darkened. The execution was postponed, for now. We turned the ship around, heading back to the village. I had survived by pure luck, but I knew one thing for sure. This was my chance. If I could use my mind to help Ragnar against the Wolf clan, then maybe, just maybe, I could prove that Plato was right. The Viking village was alive, with the sound of war everywhere I looked. Warriors prepared for battle. Blacksmiths hammered glowing steel into razor-sharp blades. Archers strung their bows, testing the tension with calloused fingers. Shields were lined up in stacks, their wooden frames reinforced with iron rims. Ragnar's people were strong, fearless, ready to fight with nothing but their brute strength and sharpened steel. I, on the other hand, was preparing for war in a very different way. Away from the warriors, deep in the village's storage huts. I was working in secret. If I was going to survive this Viking war, I needed an advantage, something powerful, something they'd never seen before. I needed gunpowder. The only problem? It hadn't been invented yet. Gunpowder is simple, just 3 ingredients: saltpeter, potassium nitrate, charcoal, sulfur. The tricky part, finding them in the Viking age. Saltpeter was the hardest. In the modern world, you can just buy it. Here, I had to get creative. Saltpeter naturally forms in decomposing organic matter, like manure. So, I did the only thing I could do. I raided the animal pens. Ugh, this is disgusting, I muttered, shoveling piles of Viking livestock waste into a wooden bucket. I mixed it with ash from the blacksmith's forge, poured in stale urine, yeah, don't ask, and let it sit in clay pots. After a few days, a white crust began forming. That was my saltpeter. I scraped it off and washed it carefully. Making charcoal. Charcoal was easier. I burned wood, then smothered the flames before the wood turned to ash. The result? Pure carbon, light, and brittle, finding sulfur. Sulfur usually comes from volcanic regions, but I had no time to go hunting for a volcano. Instead, I turned to Viking medicine. Some healers used sulfur-rich minerals to treat wounds, a bit of persuasion, and a few stolen supplies. Later, I had enough. The birth of fire powder. In a hidden cave outside the village, I ground everything together in the right ratio: 75% saltpeter, 15% charcoal, 10% sulfur. Carefully, I rubbed the black powder between my fingers. This was it. Gunpowder. Now, I needed a way to use it. While the Vikings sharpened their swords, I built primitive grenades, small clay pots filled with gunpowder, and tiny rocks, sealed with wax and cloth. Crude, but effective. A small spark, and boom. Destruction unlike anything these warriors had ever seen. And the best part, Ragnar and his men had no idea. Let them laugh at me. Let them think I was weak. They would see, soon enough. As the wolf clan prepared to attack, I smiled to myself. Strength alone is not enough. Wisdom is essential. They had no idea what was coming. The battlefield was set. Ragnar's warriors stood in formation, shields locked, axes gleaming under the cold sky. Across the field, the wolf clan was ready to strike. Fierce, battle-hardened warriors, thirsting for blood. Their leader roared, raising his sword high, signaling the charge. The Vikings of both clans rushed forward, the ground shaking beneath their feet. The air was thick with the promise of war. And then, boom, a deafening explosion shattered the battlefield. Smoke erupted from the center of the field. As I stepped forward, my cloak billowing in the wind, gunpowder residue on my hands. Every warrior, friend and foe, froze in their tracks, staring at me in stunned silence. I lifted my voice, steady and commanding. This war is over. Strength alone is not enough. The mind is the real power. The Vikings hesitated, eyes flickering with confusion and fear. For the first time, they faced a force they could not fight with swords. But then, a lone warrior from the wolf clan ignored the fear gripping the battlefield. He bellowed, charging straight at me, his axe raised high. I had no way out. I grabbed my last clay pot grenade, lit the fuse, and hurled it toward him. Boom! The blast sent him tumbling back, a sharp cry escaping his lips. His axe flew from his hands, his leg bleeding from the impact of flying debris. He howled in agony, clutching his wound. The battlefield went silent. For the first time, Vikings saw strength fall to the power of knowledge. The warriors of the wolf clan stared in horror. Their fear overtook their rage. Their will to fight crumbled. They turned and fled. The battle was over. Ragnar strode toward me, his face unreadable. "You have done what no Viking could," he said slowly. "You defeated them without swinging a sword." He took a deep breath. Then, to my shock, he knelt before me, all around me. The warriors followed, one by one. Ragnar's entire tribe bowed to me. "You are wiser than any of us, Musk," Ragnar declared. "You should lead our tribe." I shook my head. "I am not here to lead you. I only came to prove one thing. Strength alone is not enough. Wisdom is essential." Ragnar's eyes shone with admiration, but before he could respond, a bright light ripped through the sky. The time portal had opened. My time was up. As I turned to leave, Ragnar reached out, his voice desperate. "Please, Musk, teach us what you did." I smiled, stepping toward the portal. As the light surrounded me, I repeated the words of Plato, one last time. "Strength alone is not enough. Wisdom is essential." And then, I was gone.